Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Hey, welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. You can connect with me on my website, which is mikebrennan.me. And I am here to equip you as a creative person with resources and inspiration and just having conversations like the one today on this podcast, where I get to talk to people about their process, about their journey, about the things they're creating. And so if you are a creator, you're in the right place. I want to encourage you today to keep showing up for your own creative self and journey. And my hope is that by hearing these stories and experiences from others, you can identify and find yourself in that place where there's that thread where you're taking it from their story and applying something to your own experience. That's my hope today. Now, for today, I have a friend on who is Adrienne Dorison. And I met Adrienne at the Thing conference, which I talk a lot about on this podcast. My friend Terry Weaver hosts that in Nashville and Orlando twice a year. And we had an amazing time together. We got to connect then. I got to hear her speak and share her wisdom with leadership and what happens when work doesn't work anymore. You may be familiar with some of Adrienne's work because she spent years with Mike Michalowicz with his book Clockwork, and then also implementing some systems and structures in helping other business leaders embrace those processes and apply those things to their own business and journeys. And so today she's the founder and CEO of Level 11 Leaders, where she's helping leaders remove the owner dependency so that they have more options. And sometimes people build something and they need to leave it. Matter of fact, that's a good portion of what we talk about today is her journey in creating something and then realizing that she needs to leave the thing that she helped create. And I think as creative people, this is something that no matter if you feel like you're on a CEO level in a business context or entrepreneurial context, or you're a visual artist or a musician, or you're somehow creating and your livelihood is based on that. It's a business, not simply like the personal hobby or passion, but you're relying on this for your income. You're building something around that. You can get to a place where you've maybe realized you've built the wrong thing, or maybe it wasn't even the wrong thing, but the season has ended and you've evolved past what this system and structure and business or creative work can now offer you, and you need to pivot into something else. And the fear that can come up when we are faced with a season like that, and how do we navigate that successfully? So I get to talk to Adrienne about some of those things today, as well as she shares, again, some more wisdom from her own experiences and really gives some solid advice if you find yourself in that place today. So I invite you to lean in, listen, and enjoy my creative chat with Adrienne Dorison. Well, Adrienne, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat and get into it with you.
Yes. And I love that we met at the Thing conference I talk about a lot on this podcast. My friend Terry Weaver, who runs that. You were a speaker there as well. And I got to live sketch you also and kind of hang out with you and meet with you. So
that was so cool. So cool and unexpected. I loved that. It's like, oh my God, what a talent. Like, what a talent. I can't chew gum and think at the same time. So to be able to listen and, actually create art at the same time is truly next level. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm excited today to talk about your journey, or at least part of your journey, and how you help leaders kind of be more efficient and effective in their role. And before we get into that, I always love to kind of dial things back a little bit and ask a question about childhood, specifically around creativity. So I'm wondering, is there something that you did that was a creative activity, or maybe a project, or something that you remember that was centered around some creative act that stands out to you of going like, oh, this really did something for me. It kind of lit me up when I did this?
That's so interesting because I actually never thought of myself as a creative person growing up. And maybe because I often gave and maybe sometimes even still give the label of like artist as, defining a creative as more of someone who could like draw or paint and I cannot do any of those things very well. And so I think I always leaned towards the athletic side of my strengths, and so I was much more of an athlete, and I never related or identified as like artist, which is how I thought of creative,
Right.
and only like probably much later in my life, even more recently, have I realized that I am a creative. I'm just not I'm not the artist in that like visual sense. Um but thinking back on it, like I always was like the ideas person with the friend group, like, oh, let's play this, or let's create our own sport or our own activity, right? Like, so there was like infusions of that in different ways. But I had a pretty like traumatic childhood, so I often think like maybe some of that was even suffocated by the survival instincts that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like I was not in an artistic creative space all the time. I was really just be don't be seen or heard right, in many of those situations, just to survive. But now as I like redefine what I think creative means, I would say I'm not artistic. I can't draw anything besides like a stick figure, but so I always have like such appreciation for people who can, because it's so challenging for me. But I am a creative in so many other idea centric visionary ways. I think even in sports, like I didn't know this until I was an adult, and I just thought that everybody did this, but as an athlete I was always visualizing the outcome. I was always visualizing winning, or crossing that finish line, or I was very much in my head, and I could see the things that were meant to happen, and also like play out, okay, if this doesn't happen the way I want, then how would I approach it, right? So I'm also visualizing the potential challenges that I need to overcome. I didn't realize that was something that like a lot of people don't do until I was an adult, and I was like, oh yeah, like doesn't everybody do that? And people are, no, no.
Right. Yeah.
Elite athletes do that. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And you're so true about what you said, because I have these conversations all the time. People going like,
Yeah.
"Well, I'm not creative," and I'm like, it's confusing artistic with creative, and I think everybody's creative. And one of the reasons why I love to ask that question is because oftentimes I find that there's a correlation of what somebody did when they were younger and what they're doing now. And that doesn't mean like, oh, well, I was, playing with blocks and therefore now today I'm playing with blocks, right?
Builder, yeah.
It's maybe something about a process even of like, oh,
Yeah.
that whole way of getting in and understanding how something is put together. Or somebody who does puzzles a lot when they were a kid, and they're like, yeah, today I'm somebody who identifies where some problems are and how pieces fit together, and so it kind of, there's seeds of things, I think, a lot of
Yeah.
times when we're younger, and it's just always interesting to me to explore a little bit of that to see if there's even a recognition of that sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a question for me to like continue to ponder too, because sometimes, I don't have a lot of like specific memories about those things, but if you trigger it, like, oh yeah, I did do a lot of that, and that was creative, or that does relate to how I think about um, work or workflow or engaging with team or people, and you just don't think about it that way, but oh, I was always kind of doing these things, or a little bit natural at some of the things I do now.
Right. Yeah. And even as you said, in your friend group, you were the one coming up with ideas and probably bringing people together and going, okay, here's what we're going to do. That sense of, if we want to call it leadership, it seems like that was set in you early and maybe intuitive.
Yeah.
And so was that something that you became consciously aware of and was drawn towards, as far as like, okay, it's career time, and here we're going to go in this direction because this seems to be what's speaking to me? Was it opportunity that kind of came, a combination? Like, can you tell us a little bit about like how did the journey shape that way?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I think so my dad was always like very entrepreneurial, and but I never understood it until I was an adult. Like I didn't understand what an entrepreneur was until I was an adult. Um and I really thought he was like probably working for someone else, and then when I became an adult, I was like, "Oh, he worked for himself for most of his career. There were, moments where he worked for other people. Um but then once I became an adult and understood his career more, he was a headhunter and a consultant for most of his career. And like when I was young, I remember him explaining to me that when a company did like a big layoff and they would have to fire a lot of people, they would bring him in so that he could help those people that got laid off find new jobs. And he would learn everything about what they were good at, what their strengths were, and then help them, cater their resume and all. Like that was part of his role as a consultant. And then later in life, he became a headhunter. And so, like, now I'm thinking back to all the ways that maybe influenced me without even recognizing it. But my background, like my degree, is actually in wildlife ecology and conservation. It has very little to do with what I do now, unless you do what you just asked me to do. Like when you find the thread, I'm like,
Yes.
oh, these things, like, I lived in South Africa for a while, and I trained and certified to be a safari guide. And so I was guiding and leading groups of people and sharing the, African safari life with them. But also I was responsible for these people. I was leading these people. I was, creating a group dynamic. I'm also in charge of their safety. And so I feel like there's so many leadership qualities that were acquired and also probably intuitive during that time that helped me be better at that role. And then that I then take into the work that I do now, not in a like exact way, but in a applied way, right? And then when I got to corporate, I actually was working in a paper company, which I never thought I was going to work at a paper company, but you get out of grad school and you're like, I need a job, and this is where I am. And so when I was working at the paper company, um, and so this is what I mean. I think that like part of it was natural, and part of it was they approached me, but maybe they approached me because they saw that I had an affinity for these things. So my now ex-husband, he always jokes because we worked in that corporation together. He's like, I always knew like when something was wrong or when something wasn't right or when there was an opportunity for improvement, like we're in meetings with the lead team and everyone else is just going to stay quiet and Adrienne's going to say something. Like she's going to say something, and he would make him so like uncomfortable because like everyone just shut their mouth. And I would be like, why would we do that? Like why would we continue to do the project like X when that doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't make sense to the budget. It doesn't make sense to the client. Like I don't understand why we would do that. Please explain, right? in a meeting where I was probably one of the youngest, and I was usually the only female in the room because I worked in a very antiquated industry, which was paper mills, right? Like I was the only woman in the room. And so while that made him and many other people wildly uncomfortable, I do think it was something that flagged to the lead team like, oh, like she's got something that at least is trying to move things forward, even though it's disruptive. It's potentially frustrating because it means we have to investigate a project that we just wanted to ignore, right? I think it at least hinted to them that I had a different lens of questioning things that was valuable in some way, and maybe they wanted to harness that. And so then they trained me, they put me into a training program all about efficiency, which is Lean Six Sigma, right? And so that's where I like really harnessed skills and learned a lot more about how to tangibly and practically apply some of these things through frameworks, and helped me start thinking through this very proven, reliable toolkit that has been developed over the years, right? And so I think it was maybe like this combination of both, right? It's not like nature or nurture. It's like, well, these two things happen together. But that's kind of what got me into what I do now. And then I realized I didn't want to do it in corporate anymore. I wanted to apply it with small business owners. So then I had to rethink how to use the toolkit for smaller businesses, you know?
So even that in of itself is a skill set of like recontextualizing, taking what you have, your skill set, your experiences, and figuring out, okay, what's another application for this? And so for small businesses, having known the needs because your dad being an entrepreneur, I'm sure that all of a sudden clicked there, right?
I was like, oh yeah,
And
he's an entrepreneur. I could be an entrepreneur, because the other thing is that my dad, for years and years and years, like, go to college, go get a job, right? That's what we were told. And then once I realized, I was so scared to tell my dad, I'm quitting my job. I'm quitting my very good corporate job that I've worked so hard, that you have helped, support me to get, to encourage me. And like, I was so scared to tell him. And he was like, if that's what you think you want to do. And I'm like, okay. And then that's, like you're saying, that's when it clicked for me. When I started to think, I'm like, wait, but he's an entrepreneur. And actually, my brother's an entrepreneur. I'm like, I just thought I was supposed to be this company girl because everybody told me to do that. That's the safe way to be. And that's just like societal norm. Our parents told us that because I think that's what they thought was true, you know?
right, yes. And there's a sense of sometimes, hey, I want to shield you from any potential pain or
Yes.
pitfalls and the hard life, so to speak, right?
Yes.
And then, of course, as we get older, we realize like there is no safe job, there is no safe path. Like you can hide in certain places and live a smaller life, but that's a completely different thing than thinking you have some kind of security that just really isn't there. And you can't, like, unless you have agency over yourself and continue to invest in yourself and show up and continue to be better, like, you're only going to go so far in this, and you will experience things that then you're playing catch up because something happens to you and you're not prepared. And then you're like, oh, now I'm reactive instead of having been all along really laying track for things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so true. Like, he was trying to probably protect me from that. My dad was also, um, I think back to this as I have tried to rewire my own beliefs and my mindsets around money or entrepreneurship or hard work and all of those things. And one of the things that I was reflecting and remembering is that for him, like, he was always very feast or famine. Either we had so much money because he was doing well and he was going to buy a boat and he was buying a Porsche, and or like he couldn't help me make the rent in college and I was going to have to figure that out myself, right? And so I think he was probably trying to protect me from something that wasn't necessarily inherently entrepreneurship, but his financial patterns, that I can now go, okay, that doesn't have to be my experience with entrepreneurship, but that does mean I need to figure out how to interact with money in a way that doesn't put me in a similar position, because we kind of repeat what we know, right?
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you then found yourself working with Mike Michalowicz,
Mm-hmm.
Clockwork,
Mm-hmm.
and you were there for over 15 years, I believe you mentioned. And then,
10 years with him, 5 years prior, like 5 years prior to that, working on my own consultancy. And then that's how we were really introduced, because he was already in the process of writing the book, which is called Clockwork. And he was looking for someone who had Lean Six Sigma experience, but was applying it to small business owners. And so we had a mutual contact, and they were like, oh, that's exactly what Adrienne does. You should connect with her. So that's when we got connected. And that was about 10 years ago.
hmm. And so for that, was this another like, okay, here's a another opportunity to contextualize it to something even a little more different or nuanced, I guess is a better word, right?
Yeah. So he wanted to basically interview me once for the book and then move on. He does this a lot with books. He interviews a bunch of different experts and then writes, based on his now new knowledge and how he contextualizes what he's learned. And then he just like kept messaging me, kept calling me. And so it turned from like one little interview to taking a lot of the frameworks and tools that I was using with my clients and turning them into, recontextualizing. How do we make these even better, more palatable, more easy to understand for a mass audience, right? Reading a book versus how I was using them as a consultant. And so, yes, we then together recontextualize some of those tools. Some of those tools, they were just copy paste exactly how I was using them with clients. And then turned into the first version of Clockwork, which then we actually did a revised version of Clockwork years later because we were constantly learning of like how to make these things better and improve the intellectual property.
Yeah. And then at a certain point, you decided to part ways, right? And so can you talk a little bit about how do you know when it's time to move on, especially when you've invested something that is like, it feels like your baby, right? Like, there's a weight behind that and going, okay, I feel like I should move on. Maybe I don't know how, I don't know what next steps are, but like, can you walk us, like, what were you thinking there? What were you feeling? And what were your thoughts on like, where do you go then?
Yeah. I think I knew for like a couple years that probably there was a move that needed to happen in terms of either reconfiguring what the contractual agreement was between us, like our contract, or just parting ways completely. But I was so scared for so long because it was something I invested a lot of my time into. I invested my intellectual property into it, right? And at that point, I knew the whole time because even going into the project, I had to really remove a lot of ego because I knew that I was not going to get credit for my ideas. And I think that that's something, it's an interesting conversation point as a creative, but also as a person, right? That like I knew no matter who we told that this was a joint project or that I, created the intellectual property and he wrote the book, right? I knew that no matter what, the majority of people were going to think that those were Mike Michalowicz's ideas. And I had to get to a point with my ego that I was okay with that, right? Before we even entered that agreement. And I was like, well, like, do I care more about getting the credit or do I care about the impact that the work is going to make on people? And I knew that he had an opportunity for me to reach a new audience, a bigger audience. He had credibility in the marketplace that I had some of, but not nearly what he had. And so I was like, okay, then like that means if I really care about the impact, then I shouldn't care so much about the ego and the credit, right? So that was like before I even entered the partnership, had to really come to terms with that. And then over the 10 years, I found myself not necessarily caring about the credit, although there might be some ego wrapped up in there for sure, but feeling a little creatively suffocated in creating new things that then I didn't really know how to distribute them through the Adrienne Dorison name without them being attributed to Mike again, and then losing ownership of those ideas as I created them. Because I also knew in my heart of hearts and still know to this day, like there is a book that I want to write. I don't know the title. I don't know what the angle is, but I know that there's, this work through my lens, through my complete lens, because Clockwork is my brainchild, but it's a shared vision, right? So it's not completely mine. And my name's not on the cover, and that might be some ego. But I knew creatively I was needing to move on when I stopped creating. Like I stopped creating new ideas. I stopped evolving the intellectual property and trying to figure out how do I continue to update this and talk about new things or new angles about this, when then people will, oh, well, is that in the Clockwork book? And I'm like, no, this is like new intellectual property. And they're like, oh, well, where does that fit in, right? Where does that fit into this puzzle? And for a lot of people, even externally, it didn't fit into them. It didn't make sense. And so then I started to realize, like, okay, if I want to evolve what I'm talking about and how I create in the world, then I probably need to exit this partnership as it stands, and figure out what is next for me, just so that I had like a little bit more space creatively. Like, and I think my team members were big advocates for this as well, because they saw the labor of, you know, love that went into creating new intellectual property and then it being owned by the umbrella entity and me not getting credit for it. And they were like, that's yours. And I'm like, I get it, but do I care? Right. And so it was more like one of my team members described it as like, okay, you're at the beach and there's this sandbox, and sandbox felt great, but like you've kind of outgrown the sandbox and you want to go play in the water or go run down the beach, you know? And it's not that I wanted to like um, do something completely new and different, which I think I tried to force when I first left the partnership. I'm like, people aren't going to understand why I left this partnership if I don't do something that's completely different than what I was doing before. Like, I need to go, you know, start a knitting business if they're going to like understand why I would leave a perfectly, you know, like a profitable, like well respected brand. Why would I leave that to go talk about some very similar things than what I was talking about before? And I was like, eventually I sort of had to realize like it doesn't really matter like what other people think, you know?
Yeah.
And ultimately, if it was creatively suffocating me, then that's how you know it's time. And I'm completely like amicable with Mike because I never had an issue with Mike and with our work. You know, I still believe in Clockwork because that is my life's work. I was just like, I just felt there was more that I wanted to create from my lens and it needed like its own space to be able to do that.
Yeah. I think sometimes too, like we don't often think very intentionally about the role of like evolution in our lives. Of like, I came into something and it was great, and we don't necessarily think this is a season, right? Because we're not going to commit to something even long term if we're thinking, well, this is just not really going to be a
Yeah.
large part of my story or experience. But to go into it, give our all, and then in the process of showing up and doing what we're doing, we start to evolve. We start to gain other skill sets. We start to have other interests, or something impacts us. Maybe even it's a desire to do something slightly different, and to come to that place of going, okay, well, what do I do with this now? Because, like you said, maybe externally, people could look at things and go, like, "What are you crazy?" Like,
Yeah, why not
I
just
would,
keep doing it
yeah,
under Clockwork? Yeah.
exactly right. But the internal conversations and wrestling is something I think that isn't often talked about, honestly. So I'm glad we're having this part of the conversation, because it's a very lonely place a lot of times too. When you find yourself there and you're like, I feel like I might be losing my mind. I know I need to do something. I'm wrestling my way through this, and there's not a whole lot of people that maybe either A, I can talk to about it, or B, that really understand.
Right.
And then going, okay, I want to exercise wisdom in moving forward in whatever comes next so that I don't repeat a process and go, I'm back here again 5 years later and it's the same story, right? So,
Same thing, just a different face, right? Or a different
exactly.
packaging. But
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and that was, you know, I think I was in a season where I was really shedding and questioning and going like, but what do you really want? If you weren't just trying to make everybody else happy, what would you do, right? Like what would you and how would you structure it, right? Like, and would you do the same thing, and or would you keep going in this model? And the answer was no. I was like, no, I mean, I would do it slightly differently. And if I was starting from scratch, here's what I would talk about. Here's how I would talk about it. You know, there was hindsight is always 2020. There was things that I learned throughout that partnership that I was like, oh, I should have negotiated harder for that, or I should have asked for this. And I was like, oh, like, you know, there's financial like agreements and arrangements and things that once I started feeling like the balance wasn't worth the creative resentment that I was holding,
Yes.
because I was like, I never want to be resentful of Mike. I never want to put our relationship in strain. And so that's when I knew I needed to go, and it had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me continuing to do something that didn't feel aligned anymore. Like you said, like it was just a creative evolution that I had to honor. Otherwise, I was going to build resentment for the business that I had created, the team, the clients, the partner. And I was like, all of these relationships are more important to me than just continuing just because, you know? And so I was like, okay, I have to do the hard thing, which I avoided and tried to do in different ways. I was like, oh, maybe we could renegotiate the contract, or maybe if he will help me do these things, then it will feel better. Or maybe if we launch this new product, maybe I can, you know, creatively get my fuel there. And it was just like every new thing was the reminder that that was not going to cut it. And I needed to do the very hard thing, which was exit, you know? And now I think part of that challenge is a lot of my social capital in the in the entrepreneurial space is aligned with that brand and with that name, and people know me through that. And so now it's like this rebuilding, but with like a lot of eyeballs on you. I always tell people, I'm like, it's so much easier to build when and be visible and like, you know, figure out your messaging and figure out creatively, like just throw stuff out there when no one's watching you, like when you're first starting. And when you have built something that people know and respect, it's a little bit scarier to go, okay, now everybody's watching, even though they're not really watching. You know, like we think everybody's watching, but they're not.
Yes.
But to like creatively put yourself out there as a newbie again is hard for the ego. And so I'm like, okay, everybody knows me as this, and they should still know it's still something that is my work, right? So it's not that I want to delete it from people's memory, but just to know, oh, this is like just one of the chapters and seasons of my life. And now I'm moving into the next one. And
Yeah.
that's, you know, I think challenging for people as well, because
Sure.
it's like
Yeah.
such an identity shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's opportunity in there. I mean, if we think about it in these terms, but even, you know, the building in public and the figuring things out, because you are a voice and because you do help people in regards to thinking about these things and the leadership aspect and efficiency, that they're getting to see you do what you do for yourself in real time, which is scary, but it also is a thing of like, well, she's not somebody who's in some ivory tower who is like did something at one time and is so disconnected from the audience that she's speaking to. Because I have felt like I've come across people like that. I'm sure you have too at some point, where
Mm-hmm.
you just feel like they got to a certain point and all of a sudden they got out of touch with the people who helped them get to where they are. And even though
Yeah.
they're still speaking into some of those things, it's kind of feels like it falls flat because it stops feeling like they really see and understand what the actual problems are of the person. And there's such a gap between where
Totally.
somebody is starting and where they are at this point, and it just kind of the whole thing feels a little off, you know?
Yes. And I've had clients and colleagues, actually, someone recently who was like, um, you know, appreciative of, like you said, like the building in public, the sharing of the mess sometimes, or the unknowns, or you know, I feel like I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall sometimes and hoping, if trying to figure out what sticks this time around, you know, and like the market has changed so much. And like people's needs have changed and the economy. And so it's like, okay, I'm figuring all of this out as we go too, in some ways, right? Like I know my expertise, but I'm still figuring out the other parts of entrepreneurship or the other parts of this new venture, right? And I had a colleague and they were like, yeah, I went to this event recently and it was like these two top people that you would know their names if I said them, right? Because they've scaled to excessive, heights, and they've created amazing communities and revenue into the tens and hundreds of millions. And she's like, but this event was like so out of touch. She's like, all they did was tell me to like use AI to like figure it out. And she's like, okay, but that's not helpful in this context. Like, I'm still dealing with all of these. And I was like, yeah, it's, that sometimes happens when people, then they don't know what the experience is of the people that they're trying to serve because they're so far removed from it at this point. That so like that is always a challenge for me. But my clients, like my clients in my highest level groups, that I continue to just share the realness of like my fears and here's what I'm doing and here's what it's kind of like the behind the scenes, and they're like always mirroring and reflecting back to me how appreciative they are of that. And I'm like, oh, that's good, because this stuff is very nerve-wracking for me to share because I feel like I'm supposed to have it all together. And they're like, no, we like that you're telling us the mess, or what you're working through in your own head as you put these things out into the world. And so sometimes you need those reminders from people like, oh, we actually appreciate that. And we like that you're not in that ivory tower, like you said,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Totally. Thinking about your journey in what we just discussed, I want to ask you a question. If there's advice that you would give to somebody who maybe finds themselves there right now, in particular, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of women who maybe were in some kind of supporting role, some behind the scenes type of role. And now they're like, no, it's my turn to come out and
Mm-hmm.
be in the front and be the face of the thing that I'm creating. Or they've been in the situation where they're like, I spent so much time building something and I've realized I've built the wrong thing and I need to burn this down and start over or take the ashes and make something out of that
Yeah.
next. Is there anything that maybe a piece of advice that was given to you or something that comes to mind where you're like, this might be helpful for somebody in that situation right now?
I think the most valuable thing is speaking it out loud, right? I think I kept it inside for so long, trying to ignore that these were even feelings that I was having. So the fact that, maybe some of these women are, I would say there's probably a percentage of women that are having these conversations because you're hearing them. And then there's probably 20 to 50% more women who are just quietly suffering through this and hoping that it will go away, or trying to therapize themselves out of it. Like they're talking to their therapist about it, of like why they should just shut up and keep doing what they're doing because that's what makes the most sense. And it's like, okay, say these things out loud to as many people as you possibly can, right? Like obviously there might be people that feel safer than others in terms of, and I did that. I started talking to colleagues, and that's the only reason I ever exited. It was the only reason I ever exited is because I was actually at a mastermind in person, and there was like an opportunity for a hot seat to get feedback. And I put myself in the room, and a lot of people even knew my co-founder, Mike, like they knew who he was. And I said, everyone, I know you all know my business because we're colleagues. And I was like, I would appreciate confidentiality in the room because I'm going through something that I don't know how to solve, right? And I think like if you can be vulnerable, especially in a room of peers or mentors, to say like I don't know what the move is here. I don't know how to get out of my head around this problem, and I put it in front of a room. And by doing that and by being vulnerable, I had so many people in that room then follow up and reach out to me and go, here's where you're validated. Here's what I would do. Here's where I see so much potential in you, or even just giving me courage, because that's really what I needed at the time. And I remember I have one colleague and friend who still to this day, I am so appreciative. And I always, we're helping each other through business stuff, but she was like, you need to talk to a lawyer to figure out like what do you want to do, just because there's contracts in place and licensing agreements, just so you can figure out your options, because right now you're just reeling in your head. I'm like, okay, you're right, like be a business person, figure out what am I even dealing with. And then she really just gave me the courage that I could do this. I think I knew in my heart of hearts I could do this, but sometimes you just need a friend or a colleague or a mentor to go, I got your back, right? And here, let's make a plan. Let's make a plan. And that I think is the most valuable thing I can tell you is like, speak these things out loud, to be vulnerable of like where it's not everything is beautifully pulled together with a bow, because I think on the outside people would have thought that about my business, and really everything was like, we're making great money, we have all these great clients, like the market sees us as this valuable brand, and we've sold over 300,000 copies of the book. It's like, okay, all these things are amazing, but if you're creatively crying inside, then say the thing out loud to a trusted source or room or sources, and invite people to help you. I think that that's also like important, because sometimes you're still acting closed off. And I was really just being vulnerable of like, I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what to do. And I'm really open to anybody's ideas or like what you're hearing from what I'm saying, because I also didn't even articulate a specific problem. I was just getting the stuff out of my head. So I was like, if someone even wants to just reflect or mirror to me, like what you're hearing me say, so that I can do something with it,
Yeah.
and that's really what I got. And I think that that's the encouragement I could give other women or men, right, who are in a situation that is not correct anymore. That it is not aligned anymore with the current version of yourself. Not to say that past version of yourself was aligned, right? I was aligned with that partnership. There was nothing wrong with what I did in the past. It was, or like, I don't regret it. I think a lot of times people, oh, do you regret like building that? No, like I built that with my whole heart for 10 years, and it was time to move forward, and so sometimes you just need the encouragement and the strength of others and the belief of others to get you to the next step. Like I always tell my clients, like, if you don't have enough belief, like borrow my belief in you until you get enough for yourself. And that I really needed that at the time, to be honest, I needed that from other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's such wisdom in the words you shared, especially in the, like, people can't help you if they don't know. And somebody might be the key right next to you of what you need for that next step. But if you don't let anybody in, it'll pass right on by for sure.
And then people want to help you. Once you say it out loud, like that really created a network and an opportunity for me where people still to this day, like I said, like are aligning to help me, because they know I'm in this vulnerable position of like starting over, which is scary. And they want to help you because they helped get you out of where you were. They were part of the reason that you had enough courage and belief in yourself. And so they're trying to like connect you to the right people, or help you with your positioning, or give you new creative ideas, or workshop creativity with you, right? Like they almost feel like this sense of obligation, but it's not an obligation. It's just like the law of reciprocity, right? They just want to
Exactly.
support you.
Yeah, because they've been there too. They've
Yeah.
received from people. And so there is a sense of, man, I remember that time when I needed somebody and somebody stepped in there. And so how could I not do the same for somebody else? I think at a base level, that is in most people, at least from what I've encountered,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. At
Yeah.
least people that you want to surround yourself with, right?
Correct. Yes. Yes. The others really rooted out pretty quickly, I think.
Exactly. Like, if they're not jumping up, that's fine.
Yeah. So all this stuff of like, it's really creating and then recreating work and life, the life that we want to live. As we're looking towards the future, what are some things that maybe you're excited about in creating, that are coming? If there's anything you feel comfortable sharing about, or just some ideas that maybe you're thinking this would be a good forum for me next.
Yeah, I think I'm excited and like reinvigorated by the why. Like I really went back to why I do what I do. And that has been really helping me craft what things are worthy of my time and what things are not, like what projects I want to be involved in, not from a monetary perspective, but from a like, okay, this is why we're doing the work that we're doing. Um, and for me, like my dad passed in 2024. And when I looked at the business in reflection, I was like, oh, like the reason I was able to be there by his side is because of all the work that I teach and preach and like the frameworks and the tools and the systems and everything that we had. Um, but it was so different than what we talk about in the Clockwork book, right? In the Clockwork book, we talk a lot about this like 4-week vacation. And I was like, oh, that's great. But what I've seen over the years, both for my own personal life and for the majority of clients that have come to us, it's not a vacation that pulls them out of the business, right? It is a life thing. It is something that pulls them away. And so I was like, okay, how do I reframe the messaging and the work around what I can help people do is so much more than just a nice to have, right? It's like, actually, this is why you're doing this. And so helping visionaries and founders really remove owner dependency became much more about their family and like the unexpected circumstances that might happen. And then also just for me, seeing a lot of business owners that get to that point and then they just like burn it all down because it's so heavily reliant on them versus realizing that if you build it without everything depending on you, then now you have an asset and you have more exit options, right? Like you can sell it, you can step away from it and still collect a paycheck, you can succession plan it so that it actually adds value to your family or to your team, right? And so it's really for me like the exciting part right now is re refiguring out how do I talk about this thing in a way that connects with what is important to me and hopefully what is important to a lot of the clients that I want to work with, you know? So it's less about like a specific project and more about why I do what I do to begin with. And sometimes you get so far removed from that as as the years go on. And like I'm thankful to have like a, you know, reinvention, if you will, so that I can start from scratch and go, okay, well, what's important to me? What is important to my ideal clients, and how do we facilitate that and make it as easy as possible for them to create that for themselves? So that's like big thing. And then for me, I'm also just leaning into like if it's not fun, then I don't want to do it. Like I told my team, I'm like, we're only accepting fun money. Like if we're not having fun while and not every single thing is supposed to be a circus, we still work, right? But like if it's painful, like with a specific client, like if a client is, you know, if we're having to drag them to do the work, and I'm like, this is not fun money, right? Or if like, you know, we have this camp that we run. We ran this camp with Clockwork, and now we're gonna run it again. It's gonna be called Camp Out of Office, which is this idea that like you should be able to step out of your office as a creator and as a business owner, and that actually is what's going to create more ideas for you, allow you to, you know, come up with new fun things, but that you have to go and play, not go sit in a conference room. Like we're going to a summer camp, right? And we're going to play. And so that's like, again, that's like a fun money for me because it's the most fun thing that we do in business. And so I was like, okay, how can we recreate this under the new brand and the new model? So Camp Out of Office is also coming in 2027, and just like using the lens of fun money, right? Like I don't, if it's not fun, I don't want it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has
That's
bad
all.
energy. I'm like,
Right. Totally. Totally. Yeah. Oh man. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, Adrienne. I thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, your in-process journey. That is a gift for sure.
thank you.
If people are interested in kind of connecting with you, following along, I know you also have a podcast as well, Sort of Bossy, right? That's the name of
Yes,
it.
sort of bossy. Yeah.
So people watching or listening to a podcast now, I always encourage, cue one more up. But if they want to connect with you online, where can they go? Is there a simple place that you can drop some links on us?
Yep, you can go to Instagram is always a fun place to connect. I would love to hear from you. Message me, hey, I met you on Mike's podcast. I'm a real person back there, no bots. So it's just my name at Adrienne Dorison. So Instagram /Adrienne Dorison if you're looking for me on Instagram. And then all of our work, like if you're just looking for what we're doing now, is just on our website, level11leaders.com. And yeah, if you go to the Instagram, you'll find things for, whatever resources or podcasts or camp, whatever we're doing. That's kind of like the easiest, best place to find me. So just my name at Adrienne Dorison on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for our time today.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun, and like so many questions that I never really get to answer because they're from such a different perspective. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.